Hello, 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 everybody. I hope everybody's having a fantastic day. And I guess I see a thumbs up. So hopefully everybody's having a what's today? I'm so lost this week because of the holiday week. I guess it's Thursday. So hope everybody's having a fantastic Thursday. Yeah, the long weekend thing threw me off. So I guess how is everybody doing? As you probably know, you can use the chat as well. I'm as we're saying this, I'm still letting people in, so I'm just half only distracted while I just accept everybody. But yeah, how's everybody's week going? And feel free, like I said, to use the chat, type in the chat, and then I'll open it up, of course, when we get to Q&A or even as we're doing Q&A, because today I am going to do a bit of training. I promised that last time around speaking, but of course I still want to make sure I answer questions around the bLU Talks. And I know some of you probably weren't here last time. If you weren't, what I think I'm going to do today, rather than, because the one thing that's always a challenge is if you have maybe two new people, the questions could take me down a rabbit hole where I'm answering the same questions as last time. So just to avoid that, somebody wasn't here last time. Most of the questions about the event will basically, I'll refer you to the TEDx, the bLU Talks, the last replay of the last call. But if you have a question that you think is very unique, I mean, feel free to pose it. I won't not answer your question. It's just, of course, just to keep us to time, because I have an hour right to the minute, basically. I'm going to focus mostly on doing some training and maybe answering any new questions or talking about stuff just that have happened since. For example, hopefully everybody that's at the U of A has got the schedule. We sent out the schedule, the speaking schedule recently. What I've tried to do, I think most of you probably seen this, but what I've tried to do is actually go and send the stuff via messenger, even though I'm sending it out usually via email, quote unquote blast as well. But I tried to send it out via messenger because I always worry about you not getting the email. You know, it gets challenging because, you know, you send it out, you think, okay, it's great. It's easier because I send it a group email, but then you end up finding out 5 people out of 30 didn't get it. And then, so, you know, they're not in the loop. And anyway, so I felt more time, I always like to, when I can, go and send a message as well. So I think everybody probably has the schedule for the U of A talk. I'm going to talk about Toronto for a second. And then for those that are here that are speaking at the Columbia event, we haven't done the schedule yet, but that's early next week. So we're finishing up the flyers for Columbia early next week. And sorry, I had a post from somebody asking if we're doing this training right now. So I'm just going to say yes. And so, yeah, so as far as the Columbia event, everything will start basically, oh, another one here, sorry. Yeah, so basically with Columbia, we'll have that stuff set up right away. And we'll be having the flyers done, also the schedule, I'll have that done as well. So all that stuff will be coming out in the next week and a half. For those of you that are at U of A, you should already have most of that stuff. And for Toronto, for those that are speaking at Toronto, most of you probably already heard, but what we decided in Toronto mutually, I went out to every person that was speaking at Toronto and asked them their thoughts on whether we should actually still run with the event. And what we found out is that most people felt that basically with everything, I won't go into too much detail because there could be people in here that aren't based in Toronto and may not know this, but with Toronto right now, they changed a lot of their policy and rules around COVID. And so basically in Toronto now, everybody that speaks at the event has to provide proof of vaccination. So the actual record, they have to hand it to me as the person running the event or the venue. And so they have to provide it. And that part, most of the people that are speaking at that event were fully vaccinated, but some were just worried about traveling still right now with the cases going up. And then also the other side is that it just happened. So obviously that's a lot of logistics to change last minute, 3 weeks away, to now all of a sudden the venue and me both have to collect all this stuff. And then also the other side, people were worried about, what about attendance? If I'm an attendee, then they have to also provide that. And so we just thought, you know what? So I asked everybody in Toronto what they thought, and pretty much it was unanimous. Everybody in Toronto was saying, I wish you would maybe move it a few months. So for those that are on here from Toronto, I think you all know that now. But I only want to mention that because that's why I didn't proceed with the scheduling and stuff because we're pushing it out a few months, had a bit more window. But I still think it's great for you to be on here because everything I'm going to talk about today is still going to be relevant whenever you speak at the event. So hopefully I answered that. U of A is coming up in less than 3 weeks. Everything, like I said, is still pretty well all set there. Columbia, the stuff will be coming out next week. We'll be working on the scheduling, flyers. Everybody from U of A pretty much should have your flyers already done as well now. If you suggested the change, I have sent it to my freelancer, just waiting for her to send me the changes back. And so everything's all to go there. Some housekeeping logistics for each thing. U of A, we can have 46 people, and that's to do with spacing. The other thing with U of A, which people saw, and I mentioned it's none of my business, and I'm not asking for anybody to tell me whether they're vaccinated or not, but with U of A, I had to say, just say that how do they word it? It's suggested, I think is the wording, but it's suggested that everybody at the university is fully vaccinated, like guest speakers, what have you. But the U of A's said, but we're not asking for proof at this time. So it's kind of an honor system. But from my end, I said it to every person, it's none of my business. They're not asking me to know whether you're vaccinated. They're just saying I have to tell you that. And then, of course, the masks as well have to be on at U of A as well. But everything I'm telling you is pretty much as you know, Scott's in Alberta, he'll probably tell you. A lot of that stuff has just come back in Alberta anyway. Like the masks, at least in the bylaw in Edmonton, the masks have come back into play anyway. So it's not like our event's the only one doing. So that's kind of the overview of U of A and Columbia. With that kind of stuff, it's still, you know, 2.5 months out, so it's still hard to say. I know they don't want to give me that full stuff yet because it could change 3 times between now and when it happens. Because of course, New York, as you guys know, is pretty fluid right now. Like, it's changing a lot. So that's kind of an overview of all 3 of them. Like I said, Toronto, we're moving it. I'm going to work with the different speakers to see what the best date is. I'm leaning towards start of a new year, like January, but I want to work with all the speakers because there's always a challenge, as you guys probably know, right? Because if you move it to January in Canada, guess what we're dealing with? The possibility of snowstorms. And then all of a sudden you have all these speakers planning to travel in. So we'll have to figure out all those details, but we'll work on that later. And some of you are speaking at both Toronto and U of A, so you're here to hear about U of A, but it'll apply for Toronto as well. So, okay, so I'm going to go through here to see if there's any questions just before I start fully diving in. Will guests be receiving something to take notes in? Great question, Deborah. And I am working on that. I'm trying, for example, with U of A, last time around what we had was a workbook. Like it was like, it had the speakers' pictures and bios on it. But the place I got it done with last time isn't doing that stuff right now. So I'm trying to get that done, Deborah, is the short answer. Normally we didn't do it, but I'm trying to add that in. But if not that, we'll get them something. They'll have something to write on. But I think it'd be cool if we could do what we did last time, where the speakers' pictures. Scott, you were there, so you got a copy of that, I think, last time. And so I'm trying to get that done again, but it's been a little hard because, of course, the place themselves doesn't do it anymore. They've eliminated some of the services. So yeah, that's what I'm running into. So I'm trying to find a new place. But yeah, so Deborah, they'll have something to write with, pen and something to write on. But we'll see how pretty and polished we can make it. Scott said, I have invited a few people to U of A. Any idea of available seats yet? So Scott, the answer is I have to actually, this is on my list to tackle on Monday to have the exact number. The only thing that's been a holdup is waiting for some of the speakers to give me their final guest names. And so of course that impacts things. But what I will say on the good news, we won't have to fill a lot of seats, which as you know from before, it's not hard anyway. Last time around, we didn't know until 2 weeks before we were going ahead for sure. And we had the seats full within 3 days, I think, of 46 people each day. So it won't be hard, Scott, but the bigger issue is I don't want to give away seats we don't have. So I'm going to circle back around to everybody on Monday and say I need to know for sure the last names of the guests. And then with, as you know, U of A added 2 more variables, like 2 restrictions while we were planning it. So I want to make sure their guests know that. So they might say, well, my guest doesn't want to come if they have to wear a mask. And so I want to make sure I cover all that, Scott, but I don't know the number, but if I were a guessing man, like if you look at the numbers, we can have 46 in the room. So let's say there's 10 speakers. And then let's say, we know not everyone, if every one of them took guests, the room's full. But I know some aren't. So let's say over half are, we'll probably have like 15 seats each day. But that's, again, just a total guesstimate. But I'll be able to answer that more fully on Monday or Tuesday. Because I do want to give people time to invite their guests. It's just been challenging because of them changing the rules and things changing. And anyway, so fluid. So Aurora, the question of masks off. So Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm glad I reread that question. So the answer is yes. So you don't have to have your mask on while you're speaking. And in fact, that would be really challenging because of the fact that we're filming. The difference this time around, which I got to keep track of, is last time around, again, they keep changing it, but it's the city thing now. It's not the university. Last time around, Scott was there. I keep going to Scott because he was there last time. But last time around, you could take your mask off when you were seated, but you had to wear it when you're moving at all. This time around, you have to have the mask on, basically, unless you're speaking. So that's the change in the city. But the answer is yes. And I made sure it was clear on that because I didn't want the speakers having to wear a mask while speaking. And the good news is it's not only for us, it's right. She sent me the university's kind of bylaws, if you will, now. And it says right there, instructors, as long as they're 6 feet away from the audience, don't have to wear a mask. So even their own teachers don't have to. So that's the answers for that part. Okay, so let's see here. We have Jade joining us, so I'm gonna bring her in too. So Heidi, I see your private message. You and I can circle back on that one. So I can get things printed locally. So Scott, thank you so much. I'll circle back and chat on that as well. Heidi has a printer contact. The funny part is because I did so much business and spent so much time in Alberta, I had some other people I could go to. This place was pretty unique, and it was set up through my Tiffany Hodgson. I don't know if you guys know Tiffany, but Tiffany Scott was the one that was there last time with the blonde hair, and she was running the event, the whole event. I wasn't even there last time. I couldn't even travel there. This time I'm going to be there, but Tiffany's coming both days to start up the thing. Like she's coming there to kind of just help keep us on track. That's what she does. I mean, it's not her career, but she worked with Canfield. If you guys are familiar with Jack Canfield, she worked with Canfield training companies, helping them with their events for a number of years. So she's got the stuff dialed in. So Tiffany actually organized it through her supplier. And so all I'm waiting for is she's going to another one of her suppliers to see if they can do it, because then I don't even have to, like, she actually will take care of it for me. I just send her photos, and I can actually even send her the flyers. So working on that, we'll see what we can get done in a short amount of time. Along with digital video, where there'll be professional pictures being taken. So that's another thing, Trish, that we don't say it's a for sure, but we've done it at every single event. We've never had an event where we didn't have a photographer. And same idea I'm running into is that, again, because a lot of the stuff changed last minute with U of A, it changed. I didn't want to get people booked, say for photography, to find out that we couldn't have the event or something like that. So because of that, I left it too long. And the great photographer we had last year is now booked, but I'm working on getting another one. And you don't have to worry. I have about 8 contacts that are photographers, so I probably have it covered. It's a last minute thing. Like Tiffany was looking into that for me as well, and she just came back and said, Corey, he said he can't do it. So those things, it sounds crazy 3 weeks out, but I've been doing this a long time, and I have a lot of contacts in Alberta, so I think we're safe. But we haven't had one without a photographer, is the best way I can say that. And if I could, my girlfriend, if she could travel with me, she's breastfeeding and there's a whole bunch of variables there, but she's a professional photographer. So we've had her at the event, and I've still always brought in a second person. So the plan is to have that. Is the venue theater style? So again, I'll reference different venues because it's different for different places. So Deborah, at the U of A one, it's like a flat, it's not theater style, I guess is the shorter way to say it. It's like a classroom, I would compare it more to. And the Columbia one, where we have 2 separate venues on hold, like 2 separate spots, one's theater, one's not. And so that's to be determined, because I'm trying to decide which room based on number of people. They were nice enough to lock down 2 spots because of the COVID stuff. So Deborah, as far as U of A, it's flat. The Toronto one, we're still going to be running at the same event, by the way, the same venue for those that are lined up for the Toronto one. And so the Toronto venue is flat as well. I can't wait to get inside that Toronto venue, just so it's a side note, but it's this cool venue with a black background, and it has like dragons coming out of the wall. So almost like gargoyles. It's like the coolest, most epic background. It's hard to describe unless you see it, but it's built for weddings. And anyway, so that's the venue we have. And yeah, so I'm super stoked to get in there. But for those that are at Toronto, I'll tell you as well, it's flat, like it's not a theater. So I guess I can say pretty much all 3 of them are flat. We've only actually had the theater style for one event. It was Harvard, the theater style we used for their event. And that's the school look kind of venue. They had a room that is on that kind of angle. But again, this work is challenging too, because I guess I should have asked Deborah, whenever you do university events, they call theater style when you're sitting seats. one seat by one seat. Whereas the other places would call theater style when you're on an angle. So I should have asked Deborah which way you mean it. If you mean separate seats, then yes, we'll be theater style. If you mean on an angle, an incline at U of A, no, we won't be on an incline. So hopefully I answered that question both ways. So I think Heidi.
I did it. I just posted it, the Zoom link in the group.
Thank you so much. Okay, I appreciate that. Christine had to leave, so she'll email us later. She's at the Toronto event as well, so I know she was going to try to make it if she could, but of course she also knows. With Toronto, I should mention this too. With Toronto, I'm planning to do another group coaching call because it'll be a few months from now, so I want to make sure it's timely. So we will do another one. And for those that are going to Columbia, I'll do another one as well because we have just a little more time in between. But for U of A, obviously, we're running low on time. So Deborah said, I don't see a link. So Deborah, I need more. When you say don't see a link, do you mean the Zoom link for this call? Or let me know which link you mean and just want to make sure I answer that question properly. So any other kind of housekeeping questions before I dive into just a little bit of high level speaking training I want to share? I'll give you guys a second to post it in there. And Deborah,
I just posted on Facebook. Don't worry about it. It's for people that can't find the link for today's call.
Okay, so it's for people that aren't in here. I sent it out via email, but again, as I said earlier, right, you just never know if an email lands in the spam folder. It's so challenging because, like I said, you don't want to bother people and they have an email and Facebook, but at the same time, and I'm sure even at least one of you here has experienced it with us. You know, you say, well, Corey, I didn't get that email. And, you know, and I can see the email sent through and it didn't bounce back, but who knows where it went. So anyway, so that's why I try to go one by one on Facebook as well when I can. So like I said, I'm going to do a bit of training around speaking, but if you have questions on the bLU Talks that we didn't cover last time, I can see by the faces, I know a lot of you were here last time as well. So you probably got kind of the answers to your questions like, do we send in a PowerPoint? Do we use PowerPoint? How early do we send it in? A lot of those are the questions I get over and over. So we did cover I think almost all of that in the previous one. So that's why today I want to do just a little bit of speaking related training, just to help you guys that may be still struggling with the crafting of the talk or approaching what's on the stage or delivering it and that kind of stuff. And like I said, we won't be super long. I'll probably try to keep it so that we even finish early. But if you do have questions, you guys know I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. So let's just first of all, let me get the PowerPoint up on screen because I'm going to, where's this at here? I'm going to use a PowerPoint. What's going on here? Just as a side note, you can put it there if you want. You don't have to, but how many people here are doing a lot of speaking, you know, outside of what we're talking with bLU Talks or outside of branded talks or things like that? How many people are doing a lot of keynote speaking now? And I know obviously things have changed as far as live events versus non-live, but for those that are, how many are doing a lot of virtual events? I'm just curious. As I open this up, I'm just curious who's getting a lot of virtual events. I think I've seen some hands go up. You can put it in the comments below, or I've seen a couple of hands go up, so I know that if your hands went up, you're probably doing it. I'm just curious because I purposely had turned down quite a few, and then I recently finally decided to start doing them again. And because I've been doing them all along, and then about 6 months ago, I just made a conscious effort to stop, and then I started doing them again, and I'm blown away now that I'm telling people, and I sent an email to my list about it. Now that I'm telling people I'm doing them again, how quickly the virtuals are coming in, like paid virtuals. So I have one tomorrow, I have one Tuesday, and yeah. And I mean, I wasn't doing them for a while, but anyway, it's interesting because I stopped for a bit. So I wasn't sure if they were still happening a lot, but it's amazing to me how often they're coming in. And I'm getting, people always ask me, how's the live speaking coming along? I'm getting a lot of reach out now that wasn't happening even 3 months ago. So for those that are into the speaking business, if you're worried, I feel she's really coming back around fully. So Heidi, since I see you the first on my screen, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, but it's not in presentation mode.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure people could see it before I, so.
And then if you want to make me co-host, then I can let people in if they're late, so you don't have to be distracted.
Okay, let me just do that over here. And so you can see it fully now, Heidi, on Where are we at?
You look Brent. Awesome.
Okay, so you should be a co-host now. Hopefully that worked. Okay, so like I said, it's I'm not going to have a super long presentation or anything like that. And again, I'll circle back and still give you a chance at the end to answer or ask any additional questions you might have. But I just really want to do this because a lot of people are asking me, will you be doing anything related to helping me prep my actual talk? And so the answer is yes. Here you go. And for some of you who've been through my training before, there will certainly be, because I'm making the assumption a lot of the people haven't been, so there will be overlap for sure in what you've maybe seen before. So bear with me, but again, it's not going to be long and you'll probably pick up something you didn't before, or even if you've heard it before, you can't hurt to hear it a second time. So let me ask a question. Now, I probably won't be able to see in the comments until afterward because I don't want to be switching between screens and throw things off, but I'll just ask the question just for you to put it out there and kind of put it out there yourself and feel this yourself. But if I were to ask you, and first of all, do you know all three of these speakers? I'm sure most of you know at least two, if not all three. So the late Zig Ziglar is one of them. You know, I would argue one of the best speakers of all time. Lisa Nichols, who I would argue one of the best speakers of all time. And Steve Jobs, who everybody else would argue is one of the best speakers of all time. I say that because Steve Jobs, the reason I usually include him is he always comes up on the top list of presenters. Even people that didn't necessarily care for the way he did business still said, now that guy could speak. I mean, he was to a fault, he was OCD about his speaking. Like he would lock himself in a room for 6 weeks before his talk. He would plan, why am I going to say this here? Why is this going to get this reaction? What are the 5-word thing I can put in there that everybody will walk away talking about it? So he was definitely an intentional speaker. So my question now is, of course, they're all world-class. So I left this there for you. And there's no right or wrong answer here, but I'd love to get your thoughts on what you think I might be driving at here. But if I had to ask you, what do these three speakers have in common? What is maybe the first or one or two things that come to mind for you? Like, what do you think when you see these three speakers, they have in common with each other? I won't leave it there too long because dead air and in the live and speaking world is like, you know, it's like death. But I'd love to give you a second to just tell me what you think they have in common. And I have good news for the people, as I give you a hint just before I reveal what it is, I have good news that most of the people here also probably have it in common. And a lot of speakers have in common. But when people are starting out speaking, they run into a roadblock here. So what I see people do, which is will kind of tell you what I think they have in common. But what I see people do whenever I say, you know, I'm working with a speaker and I say, what's your goal as a speaker? More often than not, the most common answer I hear is, I want to become the next Tony Robbins. Now, I want to clarify, I just use Tony as the standard name. It is often Tony, but it doesn't have to be Tony. It could be, I want to become the next Lisa Nichols. I want to become the next Steve Jobs. I want to become the next Zig Ziglar. Whatever name you put there, the most common thing I hear people saying is, I wish I could be like that speaker. So now I'm going to flip that and say, you want to know what these three speakers have in common, and almost every speaker that, like a Les Brown, that is Brene Brown, that's impacting millions of lives, have in common, is they're not trying to be the next insert name here. They're trying to be the most powerful version of themselves possible. So Tony Robbins isn't trying to be Brendan Burchard, and Brendan Burchard isn't trying to be Tony Robbins, even though they're buddies and they look somewhat alike. They're not trying to be each other. Lisa Nichols isn't trying to be the next Zig Ziglar. They're just not. And Lisa Nichols embraces who is Lisa Nichols. Les Brown, if you've watched Les Brown, and for those of you in the influencer vault, if you watched Les Brown with us, his laugh alone, only Les Brown could have that laugh. But my point is, they're not trying to be somebody else. So where I usually like to start when it comes to world-class speaking, and when you get on this Blue Talk stage, the same rule applies, you need to figure out what makes you, you. You know, so you need to be the best Scott, you need to be the best Aurora, the best Joanne. Again, I'm going by who I see on the screen right now. But you have to be the best version of yourself possible. You need to figure out what makes you unique as a speaker and bring that to the stage. Now, am I saying you shouldn't watch other speakers? Absolutely not. I always say study at the feet of giants. Go on and watch. So, for example, my PowerPoint, you'll notice it's mostly images and very little in the way of words. Where did I get that? Well, I was trying to figure out how to change my PowerPoints because I found too many people were writing notes and it wasn't resonating. So I went and watched a Steve Jobs talk. And I noticed one thing Steve Jobs was doing that other people didn't is he would have a picture of a laptop on the screen, and that was it. And I'm like, there's something to that. And then I read Carmine Gallo's book, The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, and saw, of course, Steve Jobs did that intentionally. So I took a fundamental from Steve Jobs of making sure my PowerPoint wasn't just all of bullet points. Because my belief has always been, if all I'm going to do is put bullet points on a slide, I might as well email it to you. You don't need to. I don't need to show up. I'm wasting your time being there. Just read it. So the PowerPoint to me should both A, keep me on track if that's my goal with it, and B, add some value. Like, in other words, you see the photos, so you might remember the story by the photos. So back to my original point, you can look at the fundamentals of what they do in the basics and take that and say, when Brene Brown did that, why did it work? Oh, well, she looked everybody in the eyes. Oh, well, she asked the audience a question. Those are the fundamentals of speaking. Take that from whoever you want. But when it comes to what you speak like on a stage, you need to figure out what makes you you. And for me, for instance, I was always I made a joke, actually, I shared this today, that I was trying to become the first Bruce Lee of speaking, because I was a big Bruce Lee fan. I put this on LinkedIn, you can go see the post. And I even showed my tattoo, my Bruce Lee Enter the Dragon claw tattoo as part of the picture. And so I said that, I was trying to become the next Bruce Lee of speaking. But then I said, it took me so long to figure out, and I said I went and I did it. I tried to become the next Tony Robbins. It took me so long to figure out Bruce Lee and Tony Robbins are already taken. And I'm never going to do as good a job at them as I am of who I am and me. And so my speaking approach is very much different than I think Bruce Lee's would be if he was a speaker now, and very much different than Tony Robbins. I figured out what made me me. And part of that is bringing more humor to the stage. Tony Robbins is a funny guy, but he only drops it like once every 20 minutes. And so I try to bring more humor on stage. I talk about my past a lot, like performing stand-up comedy and some of the things that people don't realize I did. I bring that into my stories. And I could go on and on. But I walk the stage. Now, Tony Robbins walks the stage a lot. So I'm going to say I walk the stage more than some speakers. But Steve Jobs walked the stage really methodical and slowly. I didn't say, okay, well, Steve Jobs does that, I should start walking more slowly, because that's his persona. That fits him perfectly. Does that make sense? And I'll even go so far as to what you look like on a stage. My thing on a stage is, when I first started, I'm like, I got to wear a tie. That's what you're supposed to do as a speaker. But who was I trying to be? And so now you'll never see me wear, I don't think in the last 8 years, you've seen me wear a tie on stage as a speaker. If a company requests that I wear a tie, that's not the booking for me. I'll try to find a speaker I know who likes wearing ties, but it's not a booking for me. So now you're more apt to see me at most in a blazer, like a nice colored blazer, like I have a blue one, a red one, but a colored blazer, and usually a black shirt, because as an East Coast Atlantic French Canadian, I tend to sweat. So if I'm moving a lot and doing a lot of stuff, I know I should wear a black shirt, even if I don't have even whether I do or not have a jacket on, and then jeans, and usually Converse sneakers. That's me. That's who I am. Seth Godin, if you guys know who he is, Seth Godin's the bald guy with glasses, and that's who Seth Godin is. And he'll whip through 120 slides in a half-hour presentation, whereas I think that's too many. But it works for Seth Godin. So hopefully I've made that clear. I know it's a lot of time in one area, but I have so many people always saying, how can I become this such and such a speaker? I think it's important to cover that. When it comes to speaking, I always tell everybody this, it's really important. But when it comes to speaking, storytelling is such a craft. And what I think is really important for you to realize is every good story that you've watched, read, like I'm going now to music, movies, like songs, movies, books, it doesn't matter. All have a villain and all have a hero. Now, it might not be super clear who the villain and hero is. For example, a story about cancer could be the villain, whereas we traditionally think of villain as a person. And hope or a doctor could be the hero. If you see what I mean, it doesn't have to be a person, and it could be a person. But what I want you to know from this is when you're crafting your talk, it should have a hero and a villain. Do you know who the hero and villain is in your talk? You don't have to ever have to tell us, but you should know. So again, make sure you have a hero and a villain, even if we don't tell us who the hero and villain is. And the hero and villain doesn't have to be like over the top hero and villain. It could be small, but and here's why it's important. We as people, it's been proven, we want to have somebody to root for and cheer for, or something to root for and cheer for, and we want to have somebody and or something to throw rocks at. This is what we're looking for. And because of that, you need to play on that. So because people are used to having somebody to cheer for or something and something to root against and cheer against or boo against, if you will, you should have that in your talk and figure out who it is. You know, so I can go through my stories, like my stand-up comedy story, and tell you what the hero and who the hero is and who the villain is. You know, so like in my stand-up comedy story, which you guys don't all necessarily know the story, but in my stand-up comedy story, I talk about how we were tricked into performing stand-up comedy one night, and how I ended up performing the first 2 jokes of the night. I was the first comedian, only to find out the mic wasn't turned on, and I bombed horribly. Well, the villain in that story, I've always kind of, and he's known it. I told him he was going to be the villain, was the guy that got us into that mess, because he lied to us and didn't tell us we were going to be performing that night. Like, we didn't even know that we were going to be performing comedy. And so I kind of portray him as the villain, because, and I don't mean a villain as somebody that I hate or dislike. I just mean he was the person that you kind of go, boo, how dare you do that to those guys? Look, you brought them to the stage, didn't tell them they're performing. And now this guy didn't even know he didn't have the mic turned on because he was such an amateur, and so on and so forth. So does that make sense? I have a villain in there, whether I tell you as the audience. I never call him the villain in the story. And by the way, there can be multiple villains. You have to make sure you have one. And of course, there's a great quote by Alfred Hitchcock: the more successful the villain, the more successful the pitcher. And so, you know, Scott, I think of your signature story, and I won't go into any detail on here. People might get to see it depending on what talk you're delivering that day. But I mean, to me, I can see, you know, where, even though it's not a person, I can see where the villain can be in your story, and the comeback part of your story being the hero. Like, anyway, your story, I can clearly see it. Dave Carroll, do you guys know who Dave Carroll is? United Breaks Guitars. Dave's a friend of mine who United Airlines broke his guitar on a flight. He wrote a song about it. It went viral. Anyway, Dave's story is about how United Airlines broke his guitar, wouldn't help him out, didn't offer him anything. When he asked for them to basically pay for the guitar again, they said, sorry, go pound sand. For lack of a better word, you're not getting any guitar, and all this stuff. And so Dave's story, when he's sharing the story, it's, whether we like it or not, pretty clear United Airlines is the villain. Really clear. And in Dave's story, he's not saying he is, but it's pretty clear Dave is the hero. In fact, I've gone so far, because his name is Dave, I've gone so far as to say his story is like a Dave versus Goliath story. You know, he's the little man who, they broke his guitar and he brought down a company. And I say brought down, he didn't put them out of business. But you guys may or may not know this, but after his video went viral, which they say the story's been heard by 100 million people, United Airlines stock dropped by 10%. If you're wondering how much money that means that cost them, it's $187 million. He made the video for $150 in Fall River, Nova Scotia, in a fire house yard, like the fire hall, for $150. And United Airlines, it cost them 10% market share. But when people hear that story, they're rooting for Dave. Why? Because we've all been there. How many people have had bad customer service? We've all been there. So you're rooting for Dave, but you're booing United at the same time. And the irony of it, Dave's such a nice guy. He's like East Coast Atlantic Canadian guy, salt of the earth. And so he won't tell you anything bad about United. He just shares the story. So the people hearing the story talk more negative about United than he does. Like, I've even seen him say positive things. Well, at least they learned to do this. And so what I'm saying is he's never had to say they're the villain. But you hear the story, you know they are. And so, like, within story, the biggest thing I can tell you is make sure you have a hero and a villain. And then the next thing I want to tell you is, within your stories, make sure you're only sharing the things that need to be shared. One of the worst things that people do now is overshare. So for instance, in my stand-up comedy story, which again, I'm not going to go through and tell you the whole story today, but in that story, I don't have to tell you what color of shirts we all wore. It's irrelevant to the story. Have you guys ever heard in the movie or TV world, only tell things that move the script forward? Or you could say the story forward. Basically, what they're saying is, take out the stuff that doesn't serve the story. But yet I see so many speakers that'll be up there saying, well, you know, and then the guy said this to me, and then I said this, and then he said this, and then I said this. Like, we don't need to know the nuances in between the conversation. We just need to know the core thing. When I mentioned about me performing stand-up comedy and not having the mic turned on, you don't need to know what I had for dinner earlier that day. It does not help the story at all. You don't even need to know what I was wearing on the stage that night. It doesn't help at all. You don't need to know what type of mic we used. But some people love to go into those details. So what I'm saying is, with your stories, you just need to tell us what we need to know, bare minimum, and we'll get an impact from to move the story forward. At the same time, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but your stories should never have more than 3 takeaways. And I would argue the shorter the story, the fewer the takeaways. So if you have a 2-minute story, there shouldn't be 3 things you need me to know from that story. By the way, from my stand-up comedy story, when I finish it saying I didn't have my mic turned on, how that relates to the whole talk is it serves me in 2 ways. But one way is I'll say, and so all I want you to take from that story is the importance today of when you're with me here, keep your mic turned on. Just be here with me. Take off the I already knew this hat and have your mic turned on. So I tell the story, but it's to serve me saying, I want you to be here in the moment with me. I want you not to, turn your mic off. By the way, how that one serves me as well, because you always want to think of how can I build something around a story that serves me, is whenever I start the talk, I'll say, can everybody hear me okay? And it's so amateurish. But when you hear the story, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that wasn't amateurish at all. So what I do is I'll say, hopefully everybody can hear me okay in the room, and I'll get the head nods or whatever. And then I'll tell the story about how I didn't know to have the mic turned on in comedy. And then I'll finish the story and say, now you know why I asked if I have my mic turned on. And then it becomes a joke within the story, but it allowed me to ask amateurishly, do you have the mic turned on? Rather than being at an event where the sound people don't realize I don't, or didn't communicate with me, I don't. So again, realize what's important in your story. By the way, I just shared Dave Carroll's story. This is Dave Carroll. So I guess I jumped ahead of slide. I didn't even realize I had Dave in this presentation, but this is the guy who United Airlines broke his guitar. And so continuing on the story theme, another thing you want to make sure is your stories are always universal, so people can relate to them. Now, you can have a unique story that's universal. I'm just saying, make sure we can relate in some way. So I mentioned to you, how can we relate to you, Dave? Well, the dude had his, basically a product broke by a company, and a customer service perspective, they said, sorry, guy, we're big, you're small, live with it. We can all relate to that. So a story like Dave's will work in almost every speaking room in the history of time, always. And by the way, I've shared the bill with Dave maybe 5 times. I've watched him share the story 5 times. Well, I've watched him share it more than 5 because I've watched his TED Talks and stuff. I've never seen it not work. Why? We can all relate to it. So what I'm getting at, how you take this to your bLU talk, is ask, do I have a universal component in my talk? Is there something people can relate to? Is there an emotional thing within the talk? You don't have to have all of these, but you should have some of these. Do you guys hear, and I can only see 5 faces on my screen, but who here is heard of Stuart Maclean, the Vinyl Cafe? I'm going to say it's probably more Canadians here because it was a Canadian CBC radio show where he talked about Cape Breton and talked about coal miners and all this kind of stuff. But he was on the air doing this fictional story about these characters that were almost like real people. And he had this big book series out of it. But what he also did was he went on the road with the show. And so he went on the road. He would share these stories from the book. Well, he didn't even hold the book. He just shared the story. And what I loved is he'd always have a local musician or comedian as a special guest. But it was almost like a variety show. It'd be like Saturday Night Live, but with a guy telling stories on a stage. I bring Stuart up for one reason. He invited me to one of his events after I did an interview. At the event, he asked a question, which he always asks. How many people here have a question for me? And he would do like a Q&A for half of his event. And this one little hand went up during question time. And he said, yes, sir, to the kid in the front row. Yes, sir, you have a question. And we could see it was a little hand from where we were sitting. We're like, my friend's like, oh my God, it's so cute. It's a little kid. And he said, yes, sir. What's your name? And the kid said, Malachi. How old are you, Malachi? I'm 8 years old. Malachi, you have a question for me? Yes, I do. Okay, what's your question, Malachi? Go. And he said, my question, Mr. Maclean, is how long you've been doing this? And so he asked a question like that, a second question. And Stuart answered the questions and he said, I have a question for the audience. How many people would have loved to have been up here asking questions today? And almost all the hands went up. Some of them probably wouldn't have. They would have been too nervous, but they said, yes, I would. And Stuart said, well, first of all, here's a lesson for all the adults. When you don't ask, the answer is always no. Malachi is the only guy on the stage tonight because he's the only guy that asked. But here's the bigger thing. So after those 2 questions, Malachi reached his hands in his pocket, and we could see all this from the stage, took out 2 quarters, handed them to Stuart. Stuart said, Malachi, what are those 2 quarters for? And he said, well, Mr. Maclean, my parents always told me you need to pay for the value of a person's time. So I asked you 2 questions that's got to be worth 50 cents. And Stuart said, Malachi, here, you take 1 quarter, I'll keep 1, and we'll never forget our night together. My point of that story is And I go usually more detail because that's all my stories, I can go 2 minutes or I can go 10. But the point is, with that story, when I share it with people, especially parents, all the people come up later and say, oh my God, that story about Malachi, I got goosebumps, et cetera, et cetera. But it's an emotional connection story. Not everybody in the world's going to connect with it, but it emotionally connects with a lot of people. You know, the idea that this kid would want to pay for his time, and yet he would go, no, let's remember our night together. And by the way, he's passed away since. So the story even means more to me, like meaning Stuart. The story means more to me now than ever. But hopefully you see what I mean. Have an emotional component. What's the thing? This is how I judge if it's an emotional component. What's the thing when you tell yourself the story, you remind yourself of it, and if it doesn't work for you, tell somebody else. You tell somebody else the story, and they go, oh my God, I got goosebumps. That's the story. You need to share that story in your talk. And you might have 100 of those stories, so then you got to pick the best ones. But I'm just saying the goosebump stories should be in your talk. So this one here, I have this one up for 2 reasons. So the people here from Alberta will know that the guy in the screen here is either well-liked or disliked in different parts of Canada. And yeah, so well-liked or disliked. And if anybody who knows me knows I don't have any skin in the game. I don't go and take a side on anything, but he's either well-liked or disliked. So for those that are in Alberta, when I put it on the screen, it does 2 things. It gets a reaction. So it could be people mad that he's up there. And I've had people on my evaluation form after say, I hate that guy. That was their evaluation of the whole talk. They wrote it in the back. The talk evaluation is great, but they said, I hate that guy, or don't ever show him again, or whatever. So the first takeaway, I do this for a reason. I share it, but it won't affect the people that aren't from Alberta as much. But I always say, know your audience. So if I put this on the screen at the U of A during my talk, then I have to be aware that it could turn the audience one way or the other. Do I not? Like, in other words, if I'm oblivious to it, if I go to a city and I don't know who's disliked and I put that person on the screen, I could have lost the whole audience and I'll never know. So that part is research. Know your audience when you go and speak. So I'm saying the same with your Blue Talk. Know who your audience is. And so again, I put David Suzuki as his name up there because I know it's going to get a reaction, only to say, know your audience. I wouldn't put David Suzuki up if I didn't want the reaction, because I know I'm not going to get a good reaction in Alberta. Now, here's the interesting part. If I was only on the call with Toronto speakers who are only from Toronto, I would get a great reaction. As weird as it sounds, David Suzuki is liked in Eastern Canada, Toronto East, and to some degree in BC, probably because he lives there and he's environmentalist and it's environment, BC's environment place. But in Western Canada, outside of BC, not so much. For those that are in Alberta, would you agree with that assessment? I mean, again, I'm not saying it's universal, right? I'm just saying that's what I've discovered. But the second thing I want to share with the same thing is it's a story about him. That's why so I put this slide up for 2 reasons. The story is I did a talk, and I won't say who it's for because he'd rather people think he dislikes them. So I did a story for a big restaurant group in Alberta. I won't say more than that. But when I went in to meet with the guy, I had given him it was like 10 top insights from thought leaders. And I brought the Suzuki one by mistake. I forgot I was in Alberta. And so there was a quote by David Suzuki about him saying something to the effect of, I really think today, at a time when we need connection more than ever, we're losing our connection more than ever. And he was referring to social media. So this guy that was there that disliked him said, Corey, I was mad. I almost wasn't going to hire you when I saw him on that thing. But that insight of his, I won't admit it out loud publicly to anybody, but that insight of his is so profound. Like the way, and I'm paraphrasing the quote, but he said, I love that insight of his, and it made me see him in a different light. And so my point is that insight was thought-provoking. And again, I didn't do it justice. I'm just saying, have something that's thought-provoking. That gets people thinking. And so in this case, it got him thinking so much, he was overlooking the guy that he really disliked strong. So I just want to, make sure I add that in. Engagement. I'm going to keep this easy for you. If you want to engage the audience during your Blue Talk or any speech, here's the easiest way to engage an audience. Ask a question. So at the start of my talk, I might say, how many people here, let's say go back, I'll use the stand-up thing over and over because I might as well stick to the same theme. But if I said, how many people here, if I could get you a gig tonight at a stand-up comedy club, would jump on the stage? And so when I'm doing that in the live audience, I'll say, show of hands, how many people, if I could get you a gig, et cetera, et cetera. So what does that do? If they're on their phone, it gets them going, wait, he asked a question. I'm supposed to answer this question. It also gets you out of your mind, like meaning out of your thinking. It also gets you to answer the question. It gets you pulled in. There's so many things it does, and all I did was ask the question. The question's got to be good. You got to have a strong question. But I'm going to tell you, if you want to engage an audience, question is easier than any other option I can give you. Because I can talk about humor, but guess what the problem with humor is? It's subjective and it's risky. The joke you think is going to kill in that room could actually die. That's comedy. I don't know why we always use the word kill and die, but it's going to die if they had death on the stage and you don't even know it. And I've seen great comics like Judy Carter wrote the Comedy Bible, which was praised by Oprah. And Judy, I asked her, if you ever bombed in a room where you brought comedy and you thought it would work, but you didn't know the audience? She said, oh my God, Corey, like at least once a year. So if the person who wrote the Comedy Bible, the Bible on it, still bombs with comedy, you got to be careful. By the way, my not even the mic turned on is kind of a humorous story. It always works, but it's because I think there's layers to it, and because it's a story where there's no questionable content in it. Like there's so many things that work for it, but it's hard to find material that'll always work like that. So what I'm going to say is, if you want to engage the audience, easiest approach, ask a question. And like I said, humor, just be careful with humor. By the way, one other thing you can do to engage an audience is share something, and I'm going to give you an example, but share something that somebody has always believed to be true. Share proof that they've been wrong all along. And they'll go, wow, if he could teach me this, what else could he teach me? So I'm going to give you the example. How many people here know that it takes 21 days to create a habit? How many people know that that's not true? So my point is, there's a book, and here's where the source is. If you want to try to prove me wrong, the source is the book called The One Thing. You go to the book, The One Thing, they list the guy who did all those studies about the 21-day habit. And the guy's quoted on his website saying it was misconstrued. What I said is it takes 21 days to start the habit, 66 before it's cemented. What do we do as North Americans for the most part? We took it down to 21 days because we want it to be shorter and easier. But my point is, and I'm not going to go into all the detail behind that, but the point is, once you see that source and know the guy that created it said this, but you've always believed otherwise, guess what? You're going to start going, well, what else can Corey teach me now? So if you can teach people something that's contrary to what they've believed, that's another way to engage the audience. Another big one is keeping the time. So with bLU Talks, on this upcoming talk, we have 20 to 30 minutes. Like I said, for most people, I would say error on the side of 20 for various reasons. One, it'll be easier to make sure you don't go over time. But two, just as important, is I think that's the sweet spot now. You know, there's a reason why TEDx are 18 minutes. I think it sounds weird, but I think once you go up to over 22, 23, people start checking out. So just the key thing is, though, you got 30 minutes. Try not to go beyond, well, I won't say try. Don't go beyond 30 minutes. I'll say it that way, so it's an absolute. And the two last slides I want to cover relate to creating your talk, if you haven't already done that. And they're just two things that changed everything for me in my speaking career. And then also how to map your talk out. So, and some of you I know here have been with me for a while and stuff will know about the spider method. So that's why I have a weird looking funky spider on the screen. The first thing is about crafting the talk, and it's the spider method. So this is something I learned in my stand-up comedy days, and I'll call it a mind mapping exercise if you've heard of mind mapping. But basically, it's just a way to trigger you to bring your talk together. It's like a structure you can use to bring your talk together. And so the mind mapping exercise, the difference for me now is I can craft a talk in 15 minutes using this that used to take me a week of hemming and hawing and trying to decide. So, but all it does is it just gets me all my stuff on paper. So I do start on paper, then I bring it over to PowerPoint. So here's what, I'm going to try to grab a piece of paper to show you what this looks like. Okay, so let's see what I'm writing on here just in case. Okay, so I think I'm okay. So I'm just going to do it really quickly. My writing's horrible, but it'll just give you the feel for it. So here's how the spider method works. Let's say I wanted to do a talk on customer service. Now, you guys know what your talk's going to be on, or you will know. You might decide by doing this, but you have to figure out what the talk's going to be on. So in this case, let's say it's customer service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the body of my spider is customer service. So the body is like your core message. It's what's the talk about. Now, I could go so far if I was going to speak at U of A on customer service. I could say U of A. And that's just basically me just saying, this is just for my intro title slides, basically. But it's really just saying, here's what the talk's about. More keeping it organized than anything else. But where it comes into life, and I usually use 3 legs on my spider if it's a short talk like this one will be. You can use more of the legs if the talk is longer, if it's a full day or whatever. But for this case, we're just going to use 3 legs. So it's going to be a loppy spider. So customer service, I'm just going to use that theme. And by the way, my talk at Harvard, my bLU talk was on customer service. So I technically probably used this almost similar to build it. But let's say around customer service, I wanted to talk about creating wows. So I wanted to leave you the message of how important it is to create a wow. So that's going to be my first leg, the wow. Off of that leg, next thing I'm going to do, so you can see it here, is I'm going to create another piece of the leg. And there I'm going to decide what's a story, because I'm all about storytelling. What's a story I can tell to prove or back up demonstrating creating a wow? So for example, if I had a rental car company and they drove the car to my home because I missed my flight or whatever, or I missed, I got to the hotel and they were closed. So the guy was off time and drove it on the way home, something like that. So I'm just going to say rental car driver, but I'll tell that story because it'll back up how do you create a wow. And then the final leg I'm going to use, again, horrible image, but the final leg I'm going to use right here, this one, is going to be what's the message I want you to take away from that story? Like what I want you to take away. So in my case, it could be, here's a way you could create a wow. Maybe that's the takeaway. So now in that thing, I'm going to say action. So what's the action item you can take? And for the sake of time, I'm just going to tell you, I'll do that same thing for 3 legs. So I would have a second leg over here. I might have a third leg. And so I would do that same thing, but really all I'm doing is getting it down on paper. So it's making me think, what are 3 main things I can talk about during my talk? What's a story to back up each one of those? And then what is the action I want the audience to take? Now, by the way, the action could be one for each of those 3, or it could be one action for the whole talk. So for instance, my talk, you can watch this to get maybe some pointers on it, but my 5-minute TEDx talk is about what would you tell your younger self? Well, here's the core message from that whole talk. The core message is, here's what most people would tell themselves if they were younger or when they were younger. So why don't you tell yourself that now? That's really the whole message. If most people would say the crap that you're stressing out about now won't matter in a year's time, then why don't we tell ourselves that now? Why don't we start living that way now? That was my whole message from the whole talk. It's one takeaway. And I backed it up by stories. I shared, in that one I shared, they weren't really long stories, and I shared partial stories, but I talked about what Biff Naked, the Canadian music icon, told me about what she would tell her younger self. I made a joke one about what Gordie Johnson of Big Sugar told me. And he told me, dude, don't worry. At some point, you'll be able to buy cheeseburgers, because he was talking about being the starving musician. And I talked about how people told me what they tell their younger self is, when this company here called Facebook comes around, invest heavily, and then here's the date you want to stop investing. So like I had jokes in, but then I shared the real stories. Biff Naked shared about, here's what she would tell her younger self about stopping stressing out and all that kind of stuff. So my point though is multiple stories, all to serve the big story. And the big takeaway was, you would tell most people would tell their younger self to stop stressing out today. So maybe we should start telling ourselves this in university rather than wait until we're 45 to learn this. Does that make sense? Again, this is like a 3-minute run through about the spider method, which I normally would spend dramatically more time than that. But that's the spider method. And then the other one, and by the way, I have a video on the spider method. Email me privately if you want me to send that. I go into a little bit more detail, but I've pretty much given you the whole premise, but I do one on the beach where I draw the stuff on the beach and go through it a little bit more detail. The second thing I want to tell you about as I bring things to a close is called the DIP, D-I-P method. Lisa Nichols teaches this. She calls it the Valley. I learned this from the media. And basically, it's a way to craft your stories so that they have the most effect on the audience by sharing your messy middle, your crappy crap that happened, vulnerable stuff, and then teaching us what you learned during that journey. So I'll give you, for instance, for example, I'll give you an example I actually used. So you would think, well, how can you do that with a business story or business message? So here's what I did. So the dip, I should start by saying, the start of your dip, how we usually start it is that's establishing credibility. So that's the part where somebody shares your bio or you share your bio. So they might say, Scott is what is it, Scott? It's an ultra marathon. So ultra marathon runner, best-selling author, documentary, documentary subject. Scott is all these things. And then all of a sudden you go, oh, wow, look at the stuff this guy's done. I should listen to him. That's the establishing credibility. That's the start of your dip. Then where it goes is you go into the dip, which is like, you know what? That's Scott today, but let me tell you what it used to look like. Scott fell off his bike 1,000 times when he was a kid. Scott, this happened to Scott. And Scott, you have a great dip story. So, I mean, I won't go into all your story here, but you have a great dip story anyway. So yours would be a great prime example, but it would take longer to go through these. What people should do is that are on here, go watch your documentary to see your dip story. But my point is, you go into the dip, and what are the challenges Scott had on his journey becoming an ultra marathon person? So here's where he is today. Here's the crap he dealt with. Here's what he learned during the crap. And then now Scott wants to teach you based on what he learned. So the example I was going to give is that I had to do a talk for a real estate group, and I had to think, how can I pull in the younger realtors that are just starting, that are thinking, oh, I can't listen to this guy, he's already done more than me, or the older ones that have been there 20 years say, why would I listen to him? He's not in real estate. What does he know? And I had to figure out, how can I bring both in? So I used my dip story. So they established some credibility, always a multiple time TEDx speaker. And of course, a lot of those realtors have never done a TEDx talk, so that helped. He's a President's Club winner in sales, from his sales, so that helped. Because, oh, wait, and he sold photocopiers for a living. They were like, oh, whoa, you sold photocopiers? Dude, I don't even know if I could do that. And so I was establishing credibility. So I planned what my bio would be to establish that credibility. But I knew I was still going to lose some of them. So then what I did is I went into my dip. And I said, I know some of you are thinking, okay, well, this guy's saying all this flashy stuff. But does he really know where I am if I'm just starting? Or does he really know where I am if I've hit my peak and I've plateaued? And so what I did was I said, let me tell you about how it started for me as a salesperson. And then I told him about my first year working for Toshiba. You guys are probably familiar with Toshiba, the photocopier company, printer, whatever. I told him about my first year with Toshiba. I said, my first year at Toshiba, I basically was hired out of 100 people. They gave me blank business cards, gave me a pen and said, write your own name on them. And if you survive, we'll pay for some for you. That's how my journey started. And then every month, my numbers were so low. In fact, I didn't sell anything my first month. Every month, my numbers were so low. My manager would bring me in a few days before and say, Corey, I don't know, if you don't hit these numbers, you're not going to be sticking around. It got so bad, he made me sign a thing called POP, P-O-P. What POP stands for is produce or perish. And it was basically a letter that I had to sign saying he could fire me at any time without notice. So this is how good I was at sales, guys. And so I told the story about, and I layered it on, like, and these are all true stories, by the way. And then what happened was, nothing changed, but I discovered this thing we call personality types. And I realized this fast-paced talker from the East Coast of Canada was trying to sell to people in the West Coast. By the way, this was the good old days. I mean, money was flowing everywhere. So everybody was just relaxed. And here I'm coming in like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, what's this guy on? And so I had to realize I was only winning less than 25%. If there was 4 personality types, I was losing the 3 that I'm not. So I'm losing more people than I'm gaining. So then when I understood that, I started slowing down when I was speaking to leaders and directors that were a little more passive and just like, you know what, dude, it's not that big a deal. We're just buying a photocopier. I would slow down, and I with the people that wanted lots of detail, I would adjust and provide them with more detail. The people that were like me and very social, I was more social. You see where I'm going, right? I started adjusting my customers. What's the end result? Within 6 months, they instituted a thing called President's Club. I went from the guy who was being told what I told you and had signed POP to being number 2 in sales for the year. I was actually number 1 for the 6-month period because they put President's Club in it for 6 months. So the guy that didn't get to go actually had higher numbers than me by $10,000 in sales. And trust me, he was pissed. But the point is, they put President's Club in, and I was the only guy to make it in our office, and I was the youngest guy in Canadian history to make it. That from the guy who was going to be fired every day and didn't even get business cards. And what was the difference? Did I really transform that much in 6 months? No, I learned about personality types. So guess what, realtors? That's why I want to teach you about personality types. Does that make sense how I just positioned that? So this is what I told them. I told them, I started here, but I wasn't always here. I'm here now. I wasn't always here. Here's the crap I went through. I suffered, but I learned this one thing and it changed everything. Now I want to teach it to you. So what I'm saying is you can take your presentation and map it around a dip like that. And people love dips. And why? It's because it's human nature that we learn from other people's struggles. So how this came from the media is that's how they want to be pitched in the media. They want you to send an email and say how Scott went from a guy that should have never been on a bike again to being an ultra marathon race runner. I probably had the terminology wrong, Scott, but you get my point though, right? How Scott went from this to this. If you think about that, that's how the media loves being pitched. How a single mother went from being a single mother to being a millionaire wearing a bathrobe. And so my point is that's your dip story. In between those 2 areas is your dip story. So that's the dip method. So what I'm suggesting is you can use the spider method to craft your talk if you haven't done your blue talk yet. And then you can use the dip method to make sure you have those elements in that show us where you've struggled so that we can learn from your struggles. And with that, that is my full PowerPoint, and I'm going to stop sharing. And I went over by a couple of minutes, and I do have a call that I got to jump on here shortly, but I'm going to just check if there's any last questions. And I think everybody here knows me well enough to know I'm accessible anyway. So if you have questions after this, of course, about Blue Talks or in general, you can still ask me the questions afterwards. But yeah, if you have any other questions, post them now. I'm going to send her a message to tell her I'm just running a second late. She's actually meeting me on the Zoom link, so she's not here anyway because we haven't let her in, I don't think. So let me just type running a second behind. But if you have questions, feel free to post them there, and I'll try to dive through a bunch of questions in a couple minutes. Okay. So yeah, so as far as questions I see here, I know last time you said we can have props. If we're bringing our own, do you have to have them to you in advance or just bring them? I would say just bring them, but maybe tell me, and who asked me that question? Of course, I should see that. Oh, that was Deborah. I would say bring them, but Deborah, let me know what they are beforehand, just so I can make sure it's not something you can't take, you know, for example, at the U of A or whatever, but the answer is I don't need them in advance. Is there a sweet spot with PowerPoint? How many slides for 20-minute talk? So typically, and again, this is one of those things where I'm going to tell you an answer, but I hope you fully know that, it's one of those things that it's very subjective. But for me, how I typically run is if I were doing a 20-minute talk, I would typically have 10 slides. So I'll usually go 2 minutes a slide. But you can hear the pace I speak at, right? So I'm not saying you should do that. You might only have 5 slides. One of the challenges I think people run into is they feel more is better. So they feel I have to have 40 slides and then I have to run through them and then I go over my time and then I feel flustered and all that stuff. I would rather you see you have 2 slides or no slides than have 20 slides and try to rush it too much. But my answer is, for me, a sweet spot is typically I go 2 minutes a slide max. So I would have 10 or less in a 20-minute talk. That's just me personally. So I'm seeing some answers here about the virtual. Cool to hear you guys are doing some more. And Scott says need to chase more paid virtuals. Yeah, Scott, that we can talk off sort of line as well on this. But that strategy I told you about for how to find speaking engagements, that's working for people right now, virtual as well. It's the same premise because the people, I'll tell you this much for those that are looking to get paid virtual, the people that are getting paid virtuals now, true answer, the people that are getting paid virtuals are the ones that are going to the people that already hired speakers to pay them to speak live. So in other words, your corporate clients, your association clients, it's the same people. It's the exact same people. They now have a lower budget for virtual if they're not doing lives right now. So it's the identical people. So the same people I've told you about before, Scott, to reach out to, it'll still work for virtual. And just to back that up, the people that are booking me right now are the same clients that booked me. Some of them are the exact same clients or the same type of clients that booked me before. And the one I'm doing tomorrow is an association event. And actually the one I'm doing Tuesday is an association event. So one's a construction event and the other one's a engineering event. So, but both associations. So Kate, I saw your private message. So since it's private, I won't share it, but yeah, we can talk more about that as well. I'm just seeing if when do we share? Oh, somebody pointed out, I did send the speaker method video with the last replay. So if you did get the replay, it should be there. If you didn't get the email though, let me know. And I did see somebody message me asking me for the spider method. So I will send it if somebody requested, of course, as well. And when do we share our credibility during our talk? So Anita, great question. And that's a question I don't even think we covered last time. Maybe it is, but I'm going to be asking people before the talk for your bio. And we have an MC who will actually be, Deborah actually, who's here on with us, is going to be the MC for U of A. But we have an MC for each event. And so they'll be doing the credibility for you. And that's, by the way, that's always better and easier. I always tell people, if you have to do it yourself, finish sharing who you are by saying it wasn't always this way. Let me tell you about how it used to be, because you want to get rid of the ego, right? If you're sharing your own bio, it seems like an ego thing. So it's always better if you have an MC doing. And with these talks, you guys will have an MC. So you don't have to worry about when you share your bio. But I'll be getting in touch with you to get your bio. I have a lot of them now because of the Blue Talks books, but I'll make sure I have the actual newest one. So awesome stuff. So I'm a few minutes over. I have my next person waiting now. I saw them come in. Oh, Deborah said I should retract that as I may have gotten it. So, okay. I will say check your spam just in case. If you didn't get it, if you're one that didn't get it, check your spam because maybe it will be there. Who knows? But yeah, hopefully I answered a bit of the questions. We answered, of course, a lot more of the questions in the first one. So I'll make sure you get the replay if you don't have it already. And I'm still a message away if you have more questions. But other than that, I think we covered almost everything. And today, like I said, I tried to cover some high-level speaking training. So that way you could take that and apply it to your PowerPoint. And hopefully some of that you can use. Even if you've already done it, you might find a way that you can say, okay, who is my hero really? Maybe I can make sure it's more well-known, or I can highlight it more so. So again, hopefully this served you well. Scott just said he found it in spam. So maybe it did go to a lot of people's spams. But I thank you guys so much, ever so much. You guys are amazing. I appreciate you. Like I said, for those that are speaking at Columbia or Toronto, that you'll have another one of these at least for sure. Those that are at U of A, it's coming too close now. So I'll be seeing you in a few weeks, in fact, live in person. But any questions that come up in between now and then, let me know. And of course, I'll make sure you're in the loop. Like when I'll come around early next week for the bio to make sure I have the most recent, and we'll get that incorporated and all that kind of stuff. So thank you, everybody. I went at a high speed to try to finish quick. So you guys are awesome. You guys have an amazing rest of your weekend day. Thank you once again. Thanks, everybody. And we will talk to you next time. And again, I'll make sure you guys all get the replay.